What kind of man forces his guests to watch him execute a senator in the middle of a banquet and then continues eating as if nothing had happened? Who turns a wedding night into an imperial kidnapping just because he took a fancy to the bride? What kind of emperor proclaims himself a living god and threatens to place his statue inside the most sacred temple in Jerusalem? That man was Caligula, and he did all of that behind closed doors. From the outside, his power seemed absolute, but it was in the privacy of his palace or aboard his private ships converted into temples of excess that Caligula revealed his true face, the face of a ruler who answered to no one, not even to the gods. His reign was brief, but so twisted that even today it defies all logic. To understand how he became that monster with a crown, it is necessary to go back to the beginning. Because no one is born Caligula, one becomes him. Caligula was born on August 31st, AD 12, in the city of Antium, under the name Gallus Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, son of the famous Germanic general and Agrippina the Elder. He was related by blood to the two most powerful houses of the empire, the Julians and the Claudians. His lineage was marked by glory and tragedy. From an early age, he accompanied his father on military campaigns, and it was there that he received the nickname that would make him immortal, Caligula, which means little boots. He wore miniature armor that delighted the troops, but the sweetness of that nickname would contrast brutally with the future that awaited him. His father's death in Syria, under suspicious circumstances, marked a before and after. Many believed he was assassinated on the orders of Sejanus, the feared Praetorian prefect, or even by Tiberius, the emperor. Agrippina, his mother, publicly accused the throne, and as a result was exiled and later eliminated. His older brothers also died. Only Caligula was spared, perhaps because he was still young or because he knew how to keep quiet. He was taken to Capri, where he lived under the direct supervision of Tiberius. There, amid decadent banquets and deadly political games, he learned that in Rome, it is not the righteous who survive, but the cunning. Years later, when Sejanus fell from grace and was executed, Caligula began to rise. And when Tiberius died, some say with the help of a cushion under his face, the young heir became emperor. At first, he was welcomed with jubilation. He freed prisoners, forgave debts, and organized spectacles. It seemed that Rome had a new Augustus, but shortly afterwards he fell seriously ill, and when he reappeared in public, he was no longer the same. Something inside him had broken. What followed was not a government, it was a warning to history. When a traumatized man with absolute power and deep insecurities believes himself to be a god, what happens ceases to be politics and becomes institutionalized madness. After recovering from his mysterious illness, Caligula did not return as the emperor the people had celebrated. He returned believing himself to be something else. He was no longer just the most powerful man in Rome. Now he was convinced that he was a living god and acted as such. It was not enough to rule. He wanted to be worshipped, feared, and revered as if he were Jupiter incarnate. One of his first acts of self-deification was to order that statues of the most revered gods be decapitated and replaced with heads of his own. This gesture, documented by Suetonius, was not only an act of unprecedented arrogance, it was a symbolic declaration of war on the Roman religion itself. In two temples, including one physically connected to his imperial residence, he presented himself as a deity in the flesh and bone. He made theatrical appearances dressed in golden robes and crowns, surrounded by incense and chants. The people silently witnessed a dangerous parody of imperial worship. But there was a limit that even the Romans knew should not be crossed: the Temple of Jerusalem. Caligula ordered a statue of himself to be placed inside the most sacred place in Judaism, a space where carved images were strictly forbidden. The outrage in Judea was immediate, and a revolt seemed inevitable. Only the intervention of Herod Agrippa I, a childhood friend of the emperor, managed to convince him to withdraw the order. It was an unusual exception in a sea of madness and prevented an open war in the East. Meanwhile, in the heart of the empire, his behavior became more erratic. One of the most surreal episodes of his administration was the so-called war against Neptune. During a campaign on the northern coast of Gaul, Caligula ordered his soldiers to form ranks facing the sea and attack the waves. With swords, they were to fight the god of the ocean. When they finished, they were ordered to collect seashells, which Caligula presented as trophies of war. According to Suetonius, the emperor celebrated this victory with a parade in Rome. Was it a political satire to humiliate the army, an act of pure madness, or a symbolic attempt to dominate even the gods? Whatever the answer, the message was clear. Caligula no longer lived in the same world as his citizens. His obsession with divine power was closely linked to his deepest human insecurities. His biographers describe him as a man of sickly appearance, pale with thin legs, a hairy neck, bald from a young age. His sunken dark eyes gave him a disturbing look. It was said that he flew into a rage when someone mentioned the word goat, a common mockery of his appearance, and that he even issued a decree prohibiting anyone from standing above him in public so they could not see his baldness from above. His vanity was so extreme that, according to the chronicles, he spent hours practicing threatening expressions in front of the mirror. He wanted his face to provoke fear, even without speaking. He wanted to look like a god, though deep down he feared he was nothing more than a small man disguised as a monster. With Caligula, the line between spectacle and sadism disappeared completely. What was supposed to be entertainment for the Roman people became a showcase for his absolute power, a stage where he displayed his darkest desires. Unlike other emperors who simply attended gladiatorial games, Caligula transformed them into rituals of domination. He personally chose who should fight, who should die, and sometimes which members of the audience would be thrown into the arena. According to Suetonius, he did not hesitate to point his finger at a guest he found boring or annoying and ordered that they be thrown into the fight as punishment. Senators, nobles, common citizens, everyone was vulnerable to his whims. On one occasion, Caligula personally went down to the battlefield to face a gladiator named Mumio. It was carefully staged. The fighter had a wooden sword and could not hurt him. But when he knelt to surrender, Caligula drew a real dagger and killed him in front of the entire crowd. Then he paraded around the arena with his arms raised as if he had won a war. This was not combat. It was a ritual execution to feed his ego and remind everyone that he decided who lived and who died. For him, collective suffering was part of the show. His power was not only measured in swords, but in forced silences, in stifled cries, in the public humiliation of an entire city. That same level of perversity was replicated at his parties. Caligula's banquets were a mixture of extreme luxury and absolute abuse. The most exotic foods were served, expensive wines flowed like water, and the music never ceased. But at any moment, a smile from the emperor could turn into an order. The wife of a senator, a young maid, a drunken nobleman, anyone could be taken away from the hall and forced to fulfill his desires. And upon their return, Caligula recounted the details in front of everyone, laughing, humiliating his victims as if they were part of the menu. Once, according to ancient accounts, he became infatuated with the wife of one of his allies during a dinner party. Without hesitation, he took her to his chambers and then returned to the banquet, proclaiming that he had married her in the manner of Romulus. The man could only nod in agreement. The emperor's will was law, and to refuse meant death. Even in water, Caligula took excess to the extreme. He ordered 2 enormous palace ships on Lake Nemi, vessels covered in marble with gardens, columns, thermal baths, statues, and halls dedicated to private orgies. These ships, whose size would astonish even modern architects, were floating sanctuaries of excess. There, surrounded by music, wine, and bodies, Caligula indulged in the most insatiable pleasures. Decades later, when archaeologists found the remains of these ships, they confirmed that they were not legend. The emperor's madness had been real, tangible, imperial. And all this happened far from the eyes of the people, behind closed doors. If there was one thing Caligula feared more than losing power, it was not being remembered as someone superior. That is why he was not satisfied with crushing his enemies. He also sought to ridicule the most sacred institutions of Rome, especially the Senate. While previous emperors at least pretended respect for the legislative body, Caligula made it the object of constant mockery. He made them wait for hours, forced them to applaud absurd speeches, and publicly humiliated them with false accusations. But nothing was as symbolically insulting as his famous horse, Insecurities. Caligula not only built him a marble stable with necklaces of precious stones, his own servants, and dinners with gold cups, but he also announced, with seriousness or madness, no one knows for certain, that he would appoint him consul. For many historians, this was not just eccentricity, but a direct provocation, a way of saying that the Senate was so useless that even a horse could take its place. Over the years, Caligula accumulated rumors that, although impossible to fully confirm, persisted for centuries. The most scandalous was his alleged incestuous relationship with his sister Drusilla. Many believed that he loved her as a wife and even granted her divine honors after her death. Although there is no conclusive evidence, his public and ambiguous attitude fueled gossip in Rome and the silent contempt of his enemies. Added to this were other provocative customs. He sometimes dressed as a woman, sometimes as an Eastern god, or even as Venus. In a deeply symbolic society such as Rome's, where clothing marked social role and gender, these gestures were perceived not as fashion, but as defiance. Caligula did not want to resemble the gods. He wanted to replace them, but even fear could not sustain a regime forever. 4 years after assuming power, in the year 41, Praetorians led by Cassius Chaerea, one of his most humiliated officers, brutally murdered him in a corridor of the palace. They also killed his wife and daughter, fearing that they would remain heirs. The Senate attempted to restore the Republic, but the Praetorian Guard had already proclaimed Claudius as the new emperor. Caligula was dead. Legend. Today, his name remains synonymous with imperial madness, unlimited abuse, and a reign that brought the Roman Empire to the brink of institutional collapse. His figure is studied, feared, and debated. But beyond the myth, what is clear is that absolute power in the hands of an unstable man can turn an empire into his personal stage of terror. And you, which of Caligula's habits did you find most disturbing? Tell us in the comments. If you like this story and want to see more impossible confrontations like this one, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave us your opinion in the comments. And as always, may Mars guide you in battle.